Hello, shall we start?
Yes.
Okay.
Please.
Okay. Good evening to all. Happy Biodiversity Day. And this program, this webinar, is organized by the Indian Biodiversity Congress, Navdanya, CISSA, and University of Kerala. And we have here with us a very distinguished panel of experts who are, we can say, the who is who in biodiversity of this country. And also, this year is very important, 2020, for biodiversity globally, primarily because this is a super year. A lot of strategic decisions are coming on this year. And also, from 2021 onwards, we have again the decade of UN, decade of ecosystem restoration, starting from next year onwards. And also the HE targets. And then at present, almost half of the globe is in lockdown. And then it's actually a time to revisit our policies, especially the policies which ultimately help the common man in the country, the biodiversity policies, as well as the nature conservation issues. And this webinar is actually a platform to discuss what would be the strategies in India specifically on addressing the issues of biodiversity, especially biodiversity loss and its linkages with the livelihood, and also in the climate, totally changed climate, and how are you going to proceed and make our economy much stronger, which is biodiversity based, eco-centered, and that is the reason why this is very important. And also this year, the theme of International Day for Biological Diversity is that solutions are in nature. So we need to have a stronger agenda to move forward. And we have a very distinguished panel here in the next 2 hours discussing on various aspects of biodiversity conservation, sustainable utilization, and how as a country we can go ahead, which is a kind of policy which is based on biodiversity, based on nature and natural solutions. Okay. And I just introduce all the distinguished panelists here. Dr. Vandana Shiva is actually the founder director of Navdanya, and she has been associated with the Indian Biodiversity Congress right from the beginning. She's a chairperson for that, and also a person whose voice is heard all over the world, especially with regard to the policy implementation and specifically making the environment a common agenda across the world. Welcome, Vandana ji, to this program. And then we have Dr. Vinod Mathur, and who is currently the chairperson of National Biodiversity Authority. And Dr. Mathur has been involved in all the policy exercises that our country has carried out in the recent past, including the 6th national report submitted to CBD. And also, he is the chair of National Biodiversity Authority. Welcome, sir. Welcome to this webinar. And then we have Dr. Balakrishna Pishupati. He will be joining us very soon because he is in another webinar. And he was a former chair of National Biodiversity Authority and also chairman of FLUDGE, Future for Law, Environment, Development and Governance. And then we have Dr. Vijayanand, and he retired as Chief Secretary of Government of Kerala. But why he is here is more important because he has been behind the decentralization process in the center as well as in Kerala. And during his tenure, he always tried to mainstream biodiversity and make biodiversity as a major agenda, especially in decentralized planning. And we'll hear him, and especially on the role of biodiversity in strengthening the economy as well as in the decentralization process. And Ms. Bittu Sagal is a person who needs no introduction. Right from his concentration is always on the environmental education and has been in the forefront in environmental education and the founder editor of Sanctuary Asia. Welcome, sir. Welcome to this program. And now we have Dr. G.G. Gangadharan, one of the well-known Ayurveda physicians in the country now, and he always has tried to popularize the natural way of living and One Health approach, which we will be discussing today, he has a very critical role to play. Welcome, Dr. Gigi. Gigi is also the president of CISSA, which is organizing co-organizing this program, Center for Innovation in Science and Social Action. Welcome, Dr. Gigi. And then we have Ashish. Ashish is, if you really want to introduce, I would rather introduce him the way in which he prepared the National Action Plan, Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, with the involvement of the local communities. And this is one of the nice documents that we have in the country. And they had this exercise done in almost all the states across India. And then he'll be speaking specifically on the alternatives possible, especially when we think about sustainability and sustainable development. And then we have Suprabha Sheshan, who has been involved in environmental education and activities for quite a long time. And one has to visit and understand what exactly they are doing in Gurukul Sanctuary. Welcome, Suprabha. And since the participants are joining now, we will begin this program with a song, and that song is dedicated for the well-being of the world. Okay, Loga Samasta Sugino Bhavantu. We'll start with that.
Loga Samasta Sugino. Ramesh Narayan jiയുടെ 30 വർഷത്തെ സംഗീത ജീവിതം ലോക സമാധാനത്തിനും ശാന്തിക്കും വേണ്ടി സമർപ്പിക്കുന്നു എന്നറിയുന്നതിൽ വലിയ സന്തോഷമുണ്ട്. ഈ അവസരത്തിൽ അദ്ദേഹം രൂപകൽപ്പന ചെയ്ത ഭാരതീയ സംഗീത പരമ്പരയിലുണ്ട് പ്രശസ്തർ അണിനിരക്കുന്ന വീഡിയോ ഗാനം ലോക സമാധാനത്തിനുള്ള പ്രചോദനമായി. രമേഷ് ജിക്കും കുടുംബത്തിനും ആശംസകൾ.
Sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Samasta sukhino bhavantu. Ajab teri duniya maan, ajab teri duniya. Loka loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. May there be well-being to the people. May the kids rule the earth along the right path. May all the rivers of the world become happy. Peace, peace, peace everywhere. Ajab teri duniya सुखिनो भवन्तु
लोका समस्ता सुखिनो भवन्तु
लोका समस्ता सुखिनो भवन्तु सुखिनो भवन्तु
Hello, welcome back. So we'll start the discussion with Dr. Vandana Shiva. Madam.
Thank you very much, Viju, to the Kerala University, to CISSA, to the Biodiversity Congress. And it's so good to be with a wonderful group of people who have been defenders of biodiversity. I feel grateful that biodiversity has been my teacher, biodiversity has been my guide. And as Orissa and Bengal suffer another cyclone, the Amphan, I feel grateful that from 1987 onwards, we've been saving seeds. And like that opening song says, you know, all beings should be happy, and all beings include seeds that were orphaned. And among those orphaned seeds were the salt-tolerant seeds. Among those orphaned seeds were the flood-tolerant seeds that have been able to help communities bounce back after cyclone after cyclone after cyclone, beginning with the 1999 super cyclone of Orissa, which wiped out 30,000 people. But since then, Orissa has never had major casualties. The Orissa farmers then gifted these seeds to the farmers of Tamil Nadu when the tsunami took place. So here's a solution to climate change, very often ignored. The destruction of biodiversity is the reason for climate change. Regeneration and conservation of biodiversity is only tried, tested, reliable method for both reducing emissions of greenhouse gases as well as increasing resilience. And I think this is something, Dr. Mathur, you as chairman of the Biodiversity Authority can really push on the global agenda, particularly given that we are suffering a triple pandemic. The pandemic of a very inefficient agriculture system invading into forest ecosystems. 300 of the new epidemics have begun because of deforestation, whether it be Ebola or the Kiasnu disease or the Nipah virus or the Zika or the SARS, and now the Corona. Of course, what route it takes doesn't remove the fact that invading forest ecosystems is an invitation to epidemics. And then as the third SDG asks us to work towards health, it basically reads, ensure healthy lives and promote well-being of all. That's what that song was about. But if we allow junk food, industrial food, food not worthy of eating, to be pushed on people, and we change our rules of safety, food safety, to allow the diet to change, what we witness is chronic diseases which are amplifying the impact of the corona epidemic. We now have had so many people removed from work, and in India we talk about rosy roti, roz kamana, roz khana. That means there's a hunger issue, and therefore we need to give up the commodity production idea. We need to give up the yield measure, which is false, because it only measures the commodity that left the farm, not the state of biodiversity on the farm, not the state of biodiversity in the soil, not the state of biodiversity of your food, not the state of the quality of your food, nutritionally empty toxic food moving as commodities is not a health system. And worse, 90% of the commodities grown are now not even being used in the food system, which is why as you grow more commodities, you have more hunger. And then, as the ILO has said, with the lockdown of the 3.3 billion working people, 1.9 will lose their livelihoods. So we have to shift the paradigm of our economy. It was based on the dependence on fossil fuels, which had been mined over just a few hundred years. And in few hundred years, it's absolutely trashed this planet. It's biodiversity, but the work, and 600 million years of fossilizing biodiversity has then been pumped out. And we changed every measure of our systems, whether it be economic systems, where we measure productivity in a very false way, in how fast can you get rid of people. The only input counted in agricultural productivity is labor, which is a very wrong measure, because you should be measuring energy, chemicals, and all my scientific studies have shown that the industrial agriculture uses 10 units of input to produce 1 unit of food. More intensive animal farming combined with industrial farming, chemical farming, gives you 100 to 1. And as they think they can get rid of farmers from farming and food from the food system and make it without biodiversity, we will be talking about 1,000 units giving us 1 unit of food, and no one knows better than Dr. Gangadharan how real food is vital to our health, because our gut is made of 600 trillion microbes. And that gut microbiome is the basis of health, and it needs real food. People can be cheated with propaganda. People can be cheated with labels on shelves. But our gut microbiome, the 60 trillion beings who also want to be sukhi, they will not be cheated. And that's why the disease epidemic cannot be solved by going further down a fossil fuel chemical industrial path. All our work has shown in Navdanya over these 33 years that the more biodiversity you have on a farm, the more food and nutrition you produce. But the more biodiversity you conserve, the more multiplicity of livelihoods are created. And I think we are at this threshold where we have to move from economies based on fossil fuels and extraction to circular economies based on biodiversity. We need to shift from maximizing commodity production to maximizing care for the earth and work for people, and the two need to join, like they were joined at the peak of the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl when Roosevelt made the New Deal and created a conservation corps. I think we need to create conservation corps for solving the problem of disposed people from the cities, solving the problem of hunger, solving the problem of huge degradation of the earth. We also, and we will hear later from Vijayanandji on the decentralized economy, we need biodiversity of politics. Centralized systems make bad decisions, and they're very vulnerable because it takes one little shift to bring a wrong model to total collapse. My life has been dedicated to somehow getting rid of this monoculture of the mind, the mechanistic mind, the reductionist mind. And we need to cultivate biodiversity of the mind. That means every knowledge system, whether it be of a peasant or a tribal, or it be Ayurveda and Ayush, or it be all the agroecology systems that have their roots in India, from biodynamic to organic farming, they need to become centerpiece. They cannot be treated as if they are not science. That myth of reductionist mechanistic science has done more damage to this planet than any other myth. And with it has been combined a greed economy, which creates measures that makes extraction look like more is happening. But if I take the circular system and just pull it, of course I'll have a bigger stream, but I'll have less life, I'll have less water, I'll have less biodiversity, I'll have less food. So the economic paradigm based on limitless growth, limitless greed has brought us to the edge. We need biodiversity economies, And I think we should really, all of us, now start working from the base up to see what would the Gram Sabhas recreate with the extra hands that have come back. And we shift from a heavy ecological footprint to a very light footprint, but with a very big handprint, and combine our heads in the diversity of mind, combine our hearts with compassion, and Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina as the motto of how we regenerate our politics, economy, knowledge in this severe crisis that could see the future close for large numbers very soon and all of humanity in a few decades. Thank you.
Thank you, Vandanaji. A call for making a biodiversity economy and then the greening our politics for the betterment of the country as well as the world. Now we will listen to Dr. Vinod Mathur, Chairman, National Biodiversity Authority.
Good evening, fellow panelists and a large number of participants from all over the country. I'm a bit lucky, as Dr. Vandana has set the context very correctly about what mainstreaming biodiversity is and what our country needs to do. Taking the story a little forward, I would be specifically talking about the current pandemic, the COVID-19, and talking about how do we promote, how do we develop, how do we implement a One Health approach in dealing towards that. This is an approach I would be talking about. As I move further, can I move my second slide? 1 second. So I would be defining what this One Health approach is. A collaborative approach for strengthening systems and see what it can do. It can prevent, it can prepare, it can detect, and it can respond, and it can recover. All 5 things it can do. 2 diseases which we call as emerging, and sometimes also re-emerging diseases, because these are the ones which are threatening human health, they are threatening animal health, and they are threatening environmental health over there. This graphic amply explains that we have to deal with human health as human beings. We do have a large number of animal population over there, and then we need to deal with the environment. But this infection disease is cross-cutting. It is tackling all 3, and therefore nobody is safe. Neither the environment in which we live is safe, nor humans are safe, nor the animals are safe over there. And see, this is a graphic which shows that these diseases are occurring at all places in the world, but India happens to be a hottest hotspot. And the reason is very clear. We have 1.3 billion people. We have a huge diversity of mammalian life. And we also have a huge wildlife-human interface. All 3 things combined are making India as a hotspot of these pandemic diseases. And there are other reasons too. Huge economic reasons in terms of loss of employment, loss of jobs, loss of things, both to humans and also to the cattle. 1 in 7 cattle is likely to be affected by such kind of a disease over there. And Dr. Vandana mentioned about the climate change. Now, how this climate change is going to mediate is pretty now well being understood, that as temperatures rise, and particularly if we take the case of malaria, the incidence of malaria is going to go up, and so is the issue of these emerging and re-emerging environmental diseases which are there. See, these are the figures I could call out before the current pandemic. See the kind of economic losses that we are talking to a range of industry apart from human themselves. We are now talking of the shutting of the hotel industry, the shutting of the airline industry, the mineral industry, and so on and so forth. So the entire economic growth for which we were running about and we were damaging the environment is now going to get further affected as we move along. So there are very strong reasons that we need to look at newer approaches, and we need to look at what this One Health approach can do. But it is not easy. See, the simple graphic is showing what kind of disease transmissions take place. They are now different mechanisms which you can see, from transportation to translocation to technology. Everything is affecting us, and therefore the solutions to this kind of situation that we are in is not very easy to find. Nevertheless, we can make a beginning. I now want to deal about things which have been on social media for quite some time, dealing with curves. I'm sure as young kids, we all understood what these curves were. But this particular curve, which you see, the COVID-19 curve, and the entire social media was up that this curve needs to be flattened. And surely it needs to be flattened because, as you can see, the number of cases which they go up and the ability to deal with them, you need to bring them down to a manageable portion. So in the last 6 months, what we have been seeing and hearing is the effort to flatten this curve. Whether we have been successful or not, or partially or little, is anybody's guess. But the fact is that we have tried to look at flattening the curve as it affects the disease pandemic. But if we go further, this is what I want, this is the key point I want to make in this presentation today, that this is the natural capital loss curve. See this dark green line pointing downwards. We are on this looking at the natural capital development path, which, as you can see, between 2010 and 2050, we are on the decline. So to deal with this, we need to do two things. We need to halt the current biodiversity loss, whether through policy, whether through action, whether through investment, but we need to do a halt. And not only we need to do a halt, we then have to embark on a path of change. And this is not going to be easy. As I said, that the COVID curve, which looked difficult, but India has shown an example that yes, one can attempt that, one can mobilize forces, one can mobilize resources, but see what will be required to deal with changing the trajectory of the natural capital loss curve. And these arrows which you see on your right, we need to invest and continue to invest in our protected areas, the buffer zone, the multiple use areas, and so on. We need to look at the restoration part of it. A lot of science of restoration is involved over there. We need to look at green infrastructure. See, nobody present here will say that we don't need roads, we don't need rail, we don't need transmission lines. Yes, we need them. But can we develop a paradigm in which this development can go along with conservation? Can we then think of underpasses and overpasses and animal crossings wherever they are needed? And that is where this green infrastructure is all about. We need to continue our investment in natural capital. Dr. Shiva talked about agriculture and agriculture innovations. I think that is an area which our country needs to do a lot, because we cannot look at just the modern facets of conservation and agriculture. We need to go back to our age-old method, age-old practices, and then see what we can do to continue them. We need to also deal with markets. We also deal with the subsidies. Many of these subsidies are perverse subsidies. So if we are looking at changing the trajectory of the natural capital loss, then these kind of investments are needed. We need to put our act together and to see that how best we can do that and how we can improve the governance model. And I'm very sure that my colleague Ashish is going to dwell on that. But yes, we need better models of governance. We need better models of regulation. These have not been delivering the kind of situation we want to be in. We are already talking of with the so-called, if I can say, failure of the Aichi targets. We are now looking at the post-2020 agenda. This is the time where we need to look at, we need to influence this policy, both at the country level and at the global level, where India is a part of that how do we improve governance? How can we show models which have worked? It's not the question that we have to say that these models can work. These models have worked. We need to upscale them. We need to make them work in every sector of governance over there. So I have some good news to share with our biodiversity community that while India is planning for different missions, these new missions are to deal with artificial intelligence, with quantum mechanics, quantum physics, and so on, which Dr. Vandana Shiva's field is. But we are, ma'am, also talking of a new mission on national biodiversity mission and human well-being. And see, again, it has been very nicely combined that biodiversity cannot be looked by itself. It has to be linked with human well-being. So this is the new mission which currently the government is trying to build, and of which there is a very important component of One Health, because this One Health, the current pandemic has shown that unless we invest, unless we synergize, unless we bring together our agencies, which often work at cross purposes, we will not be able to meet the not only this pandemic, but many other pandemics which are likely to come in future. I won't get into the details here, but here is the way ahead. We need to enhance very active and integrated surveillance. See, the current pandemic has given that we were caught napping in many areas. The wildlife, domestic, animal, human interface has been there for hundreds of years. But have we studied that? Have we studied those linkages over there? So that is where we need to concentrate on. These are new areas of research, and I'm sure a large number of participants in today's dialogue are from the research community. We need to look at these pathogens, we need to look at vectors, we need to look at the cycles over there. We want to establish sentinel surveillance sites, which basically means that in order to have a better preparedness, we must continuously monitor in which areas these things are. It could be Northeast India, it could be Western Ghats, it could be high biodiversity rich areas, but these areas need to be monitored very effectively. And finally, this particular thing, if you want my tagline, we now need to bend the natural capital loss curve. That is the plea I'm going to make to our fellow scientists, that we need to stem that, we need to reverse the trend, and unless we deal with this curve, we are going to have many more pandemics. As Dr. Shiva said, this pandemic is about disease, but there are other pandemics also. So those pandemics might research if we do not bend the natural capital loss curve. These were some few things I wanted to say, and I will wait for Q&A to come. Thank you very much for providing this opportunity.
Madhur, we can now end sharing.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
I'll do that.
Stop the screen share.
Can you do it from your end?
On the top side, you'll see a stop share.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. No, we have heard from Dr. Vinod Mathur the need for actually bending the preventing the national biodiversity loss, as well as new strategies that the government is actually planning. We'll have more discussion on that. Welcome, Dr. Balakrishna Pishupati, who has now joined us.
Thank you.
Yeah, we will now hear from we'll hear from Shri S.M. Vijayanand, especially on the decentralization policy and how to mainstream biodiversity, particularly when we speak about decentralized planning and sustainable development.
Thank you. Happy Biodiversity Day. Good evening. And I am the odd man out, belonging to a tribe much reviled, a species much reviled by activists, rightly so. So mainstreaming into the current practice of development, as has been indicated, is well nigh impossible, because much of it militates against the basics of biodiversity. So the challenge is harmonizing biodiversity and notions of development so that they are integrated organically. And nudge has not helped. We have been nudging for a long time, and now probably can the cataclysmic pandemic make us see reason and act? I'm not too sure. The significance and value of biodiversity has been extremely well expounded. I've personally benefited from reading a lot of literature produced particularly by persons like Dr. Vandana Shiva, and I've myself enlightened, but I've not been able to really translate it into some grassroots level practice to the extent we would have liked. We have learned the significance, aesthetic to economic, social to political, subsistence to spiritual. But internalizing it, putting into practice by policymakers and implementers is still a long way. Historically, I understand that pandemics have resulted in major tectonic shifts in social, political, and economic order. The Black Death of the 14th, early 15th century being the most significant example. Now, COVID, basically, we are all in and understanding COVID, seems to have induced certain realizations, however faint they are. The limitations of the current neoliberal concept, which is excluding, very fragile, ignoring the public, it has now come out, ignoring nature, that has come out quite sharply. And the boundaries of human power through technology, which we thought are boundless, has not only suddenly shrunk smaller than a compound, and we are trapped. And more than anecdotal evidence of nature renewing itself, birds, animals, vegetation, there is stark proof that our development has been highly disruptive of the natural order and brought us negative effects. And now there is increasing emphasis, which I think will be explained later, on natural and diverse food to increase your immunity. So that probably could be a turning point. And sudden prominence of One Health. And the shoots of a new governance arrangement. I was in quite a few webinars, very surprised, areas where panchayats are very weak in India. They are having willy-nilly some kind of local action, community-led panchayats, self-help groups, CSOs, and local volunteers. Emerging out of necessity, willy-nilly, not anybody wants to confer power to the local. And so this is an opportunity to look at basics and with a slightly different mindset. So when I look at issues which I have encountered in trying to understand and realize this concept in practice, so convincing people, ordinary people as well as your elected people, the implications in day-to-day life, evidence-based. Evidence is there, I've read. So, but how do you convey to the farmer, convey to the peasant, to the agriculture labor? Traditional communities know it, but who have been slightly out of the tradition, the urgency, and which climate change fortunately has been able to convey, though they are all interrelated. And particularly for health. And probably in this new era, if you don't lose time, health could be an entry point along with local livelihoods. So we need to, the pathways of direct benefit have to be traced and made visible. I'm speaking in a bureaucratic sense of converting an idea into an action plan and a project at the local level. And the challenge of disaggregation to the neighborhood and household. Globally we know, regionally we know, but to the household, how do we really do it? The positives and negatives. And biodiversity, more than anything else, requires convergence. Having been in government for 36 years, the most difficult thing to achieve convergence across actors. Even within the same department, it is difficult. And somehow, the Biodiversity Act of 2002 raised a lot of hopes. But in practice, it's a very flat kind of implementation. The institutions are weak. Human resource support is relatively, I'm mentioning basically at the state level. Funds are very low. The local biodiversity fund has not been created, even in a state like Kerala, where the local government spend about 25% of your development fund. The processes beyond preparation of a register, people's biodiversity register, the processes have not been activated. Regulations are non-existent, and the plans which have been prepared at the national and state level have not been transmitted to the field. In this context, what could be the way ahead? I would say that somehow climate change is resonating, and everybody seems to be aware of climate change. I was very surprised in Simla, the taxi driver telling me about climate change. So it has somehow resonated more than probably biodiversity. They're all integrated. You can't separate, I know. So, and SDG has achieved a remarkable thing of breaking down concepts into activities, targets, and some kind of indicators. Maybe biodiversity doesn't lend itself to such kind of verticals, but probably we need to try, experts like you. And the point I wanted to make is a real point I wanted to make. Go local. Real citizen education, focusing on students. And I would request you, the largest unutilized potential in India is not the Gram Panchayats, the self-help groups of people who are struggling for livelihood, who have rich knowledge of their environment, and they are sharing all the burdens. And now the burden of COVID also, and the burden of livelihood post-COVID, it is on them. And there are 6 million self-help groups in India. A good number of them active and live. So we ride on them and work with the Gram Panchayat, 250,000 Gram Panchayats, 3 million plus elected representatives, of which 40% are women. So I always dream of an alliance of the self-help groups, particularly the DDs of self-help groups and the elected women representatives. And fund availability is there, is not much understood. I just made a back of the envelope calculation for the next 5 years. Provided the Finance Commission keeps its trend, the local government, the Gram Panchayats alone, could have more than 6 lakh crore, which is a huge sum, much of which, particularly in our regions, can be spent on biodiversity kind of thing. So your local biodiversity management committees, quality PBR, which is owned, understood by the people, discussed in Gram Sabhas, as was mentioned. So we now have a GPD. While planning is dead in Delhi, Gram Panchayat have some modicum of planning. It's mandated. Now, can we add on with the active knowledge of issues and with some local investment for biodiversity? That solves a challenge. I'm sure a lot of civil society organizations would be listening to this, using schemes which are conventional schemes like the livelihood scheme and MGNREGS, and health as an entry point. Can we enlarge, to use a jargon which I learned recently, the GDP of the poor? So that is very important. Agroecological food for principles for quality food, which is now gradually coming back. But again, the biggest problem with Gram Panchayat is nothing. 2 things. 1, capacity. 2nd, lack of trust. We don't see them as a local government. The solution is what I call soft devolution. Put self-esteem in them. You are a local government. We expect you to perform. Nothing else. Even you don't have to give any formal authority. If you give that, it will be a great thing. So how do we do? We can't cover all the 250,000 Gram Panchayats. My idea is nurture beacons as schools of practice, here and there in critical, as was mentioned, hottest of hotspots. If you can nurture beacons, then the hub and spoke thing naturally emerges. And we have great concepts. Cluster facilitation team, which means experts and CSOs can come and facilitate a cluster of local governments accepted by government of India. Unnat Bharat Abhiyan, a great idea, not yet realized. Then in Kerala came out with voluntary technical core. So these are common things. And community resource persons from among the SHGs, probably they will be the biggest change agents. I've seen them all over India when I was at the Ministry of Rural Development. So building blocks of change from below, beyond platitudes and slogans, with rich evidence from grassroots level practice, which we need to push. And my hope is that from a self-centered, aggressively competitive exploitative to a more altruistic, cooperative, compassionate society, economy, and polity in a Gandhian sense. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you, Vijayan sir. You have a lot of experiences in this field, and probably we'll have more discussion on that, especially strengthening the biodiversity management committees who are only doing the business of biodiversity register now, and there is no biodiversity fund which is actually percolating down to the grassroots. And probably by strengthening the self-help groups and strengthening the local communities, how better we can actually channel the whole energy in resource utilization as well as sustainable utilization of biodiversity at the grassroots level. Thank you. We will come back to you after the first round of discussions. And we'll again, I'll invite Dr. Mr. Bittusagal to speak on your views in this.
I think the fact is that all of us in our different ways will agree that biodiversity has to be protected. The issue right now is that we are in a state of deep decline, and we're not in a state of, it's business as usual is still going on, and it is mistakenly presumed, not just by India, but by every country in the world, that when we set aside areas for biodiversity protection, that we are coming in the way of either development or economics. Let's start with COVID-19. It's been, what, 30 years now that we've been saying that, look, between the destruction of the biosphere and the introduction of toxics, particularly chlorinated compounds, we are actually attacking ourselves in two ways. One, of course, the climate issue is hanging there on top of us like a huge threat. But our only real defense against COVID-19 or the next one, which is about to come out, is our immune system. Now, if you take your endocrine system, it is being damaged by chlorinated compounds, whether they be PVC or whether there be so many additives that go into bottles and this and that. And so we have two problems with our biodiversity right now. One is we're behaving like neighbors from hell with the rest of the species on Earth. Two, the entire edifice, the economic edifice, and I'm starting from at one level, the World Bank post the war, the Bretton Woods sisters, and all the way down to India today. We have absolutely no idea, and no economist has yet been able to put down a value, and that value is not monetary, that value is existential, on ecosystems. I mean, ecosystems are infrastructures. If you want to build a road, you don't take that alignment along a railway track and rip up the railway track to set another infrastructure on top, which is a road. If I can bypass Muradabad, why can't I bypass a very, very critical wetland or a very critical sanctuary that has biodiversity that will probably help us with our food security, which will probably help us with our climate? These are misunderstandings, and we can articulate them, but we are running into a problem with biodiversity protection on 2, 3, 4, 5 multiple fronts. One of this is the imperative of short-term profit for corporates, large corporations. It's the next quarter, otherwise the CEO gets sacked. With the political system, it's a short-term matter. Will I get elected the next particular season? And in order to get elected, I have to take money from XYZ, who becomes a lobbying source. And even today, if we are seeing coal mining going on in the Northeast and across the whole country, this is like burning the lifeboats on a sinking Titanic. So how do we break this? The problem, as I see it right now, is that when the British were here, they divided and ruled our country. Today, that same strategy is being to take the people who are working for human rights and the forest rights. They are, at one time, we were all together, working together, and it became an immovable resistance force. Through one reason and another, we've become largely separated. So you have academics on one side, you have bureaucrats on one side, you have corporates on one side, you have politicians on one side, and who actually want ecosystems to be protected. We are self-dividing ourselves. In other words, we are gifting those people who are destroying our biosphere a free run with virtually no opposition, because individually we do not have the ability to resist the Goliath that is trampling over ecosystems. There are a whole lot of things to be flagged. We can't discuss them in detail. Everybody here, I love that dog, whoever's it is. Everybody here will probably have read the IPBES report. That's the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. The science of this report is impeccable. The interpretation is actually could be very dangerous. There is no more democratic way to distribute resources. There's no better equitable distribution possible than to allow biodiversity to flourish, as Vandana had so correctly said. And when today, people like me, for instance, I edit Sanctuary magazine, I've been branded wrong by, irrespective of what I really feel inside, I've been branded wrong by the corporates, I've been branded wrong by the politicians, I've also been branded wrong by the human rights guys. They think I want to save tigers. The tiger is just a metaphor. I actually want Vandana to save the soil microflora. That's where the biodiversity begins. I want to see that poisons don't come into my system and destroy the biodiversity of my gut. I mean, biodiversity is an all-encompassing thing, and there is a simple thing. Actually, with all due apologies, this audience that I see before me and possibly much of those who are listening are far too old for me. I'm only 72 years old, but my constituency is on average age 12, you know. So we speak to them in very simple terms. And one of the things we tell them is that the biosphere owns the technosphere. The technosphere is a wholly owned subsidiary of the biosphere. And that includes the economic systems, that includes the political systems, that includes every system, including human rights. Na rahe baans na baje bansuri. So if we can understand at this point that the unity between those looking to protect human rights in any form whatsoever, it cannot be done unless we protect the biosphere, because you will not need an enemy, an external enemy or a colleague who's an enemy. You will merely not be able to fulfill the gift of life for people who are particularly at the lowest rungs. But as we've seen with COVID-19, it doesn't matter whether you're a prince or a pauper, you're equally vulnerable. And the next pandemic is waiting, probably sitting in the Northeast or in the Western Ghats. So let me condense what I'm saying. At this moment in time, it's very easy to say, ye mat karo, wo mat karo, aisa mat karo, waisa mat karo. And then the question is very easily put aside and saying, these guys don't want any development at all. I think the largest financial investment ever made in India was on large dams. I'm taking now even the capital cost of the natural resources we've drowned and destroyed. Forget about, for the moment, mines and stuff like that. But in the process of making these dams, the connection was not known. Civil engineers were given the job of making these dams and ensuring our food security and providing water to the Green Revolution in Punjab, Haryana, Western UP. But the connection between the forests in the catchment area, where people like me come in and say, look, protect this orchid or protect that elephant, is the same connection between your teeth and your gums, or your blood and your lungs. You cannot have perfect orthodontia and have gum disease. Your teeth will fall out. And that exactly is the analogy I would draw right now on the issue of biodiversity. I would say that at this time, we are under attack from multiple sources. No doubt, even today as we speak, clearances are being given for ecosystems which are absolutely necessary for our survival on the Indian subcontinent. Those of you who have followed the various COP meetings will know that one particular Australian Prime Minister said that, why are you island nations making such a fuss? Just come to Australia, we'll settle you. So some of us got up and said, would you make the same offer to India? You know, I mean, you're talking about 3-4 lakh people. We're talking about 1.3 billion people. And India is actually a ship with limited resources. And here is the biodiversity problem I'd like to present to the panel. Ashish is aware of this. Punjab, Haryana, Western UP is not going to be the food basket of India anymore. The glaciers have melted. The water stock is going down. From Bangladesh, apart from the cyclone that has hit now, the drowning and the water force is one part of it. Salinity is the real issue. Salinity is going to actually damage kidneys faster than almost any other thing in the short run. We are likely to see a migration northward, which will dwarf what we saw in Syria, which was where women invented agriculture 11,000 years ago. So just imagine, from Punjab, Haryana, Western UP, we have rivers that no longer have the flows that we had anticipated. Because of climate change, we have the sea level rise taking place and coastal aquifers are getting saline. Because of the super cyclones that are coming, a huge population, maybe 10 million, 12 million people between Bangladesh and India will start moving northward. We have social breakdown written into our destiny. And this is not a tale of woe alone. This is also a tale of hope, because it should actually drive us together. I mean, first of all, I mean, Sun Tzu said that. I think many people have claimed this, but my enemy's enemy is my friend. So what is the greater enemy? Is it the human rights versus the biosphere protectors? Or is it the fact that na rahe baans na baje baans, the whole thing is going down? Somebody is coming here and extirpating the wetlands, coastal systems, grasslands. The glaciers are melting, more coal coming out. We should be getting together, not to fight them, but to shine a light on those people who understand that the connections between the biodiversity and the quality and existence of our life is complete. Put another way, frankly, like your liver, nature, we need to leave half of nature completely alone. And when I say completely alone, I'm not talking about the small amounts that people will take from a village here or a village there. I'm talking about the massive exploitation, the total destruction of ecosystems that is taking place across the world in rainforests, the coastal area. The CRZ rules that we had made to get ready for a time like this are now being dismantled. We are engaged right now in the ultimate human adventure. It's a war against the next generation. It's intergenerational colonization. The British only colonized us geographically. We are colonizing people in time. I think we need to check for ourselves that business as usual is not something that applies only to corporate, it also applies to NGOs. It also applies to people like us. I frankly think that we're intelligent minds in disobedient lifestyles, and we should consume less. And COVID-19 has given us such a clear indication that all these various COPs that took place, the Paris thing, they put trillions of dollars it'll take to clean up, it'll do this, it'll do, you need this. They basically made it impossible. There's not enough money to solve it. But the money is not needed to solve it. The money is needed not to be spent to destroy it. And for that reason, Ashish, I believe that it is a great failing of yours personally and mine personally. I'm just holding us out as examples like the tiger, that we haven't been able to come together and articulate properly. Na rahe baans na baje bansuri. Even if I disagree with you, let me work together to see the larger danger which threatens the entire biosphere, and then let us go back and talk in terms of the fact that from this biosphere, equitable distribution takes place. I close on this, that this is not a tale of woe. There is a solution staring us right in the face right now. Our 4,000 large dams, 4,000 plus, catchments are destroyed. Lean season flows of water are down. Marathwada is a classic example. 95% of the catchment is very degraded. The first 100, 150 dams in India were built with human labor. I would say that if the direct transfers, instead of these hundreds and thousands of crores of rupees going to just a bank and just to an institution, it should go down to those people who can come and repair the catchments where they live. They should be able to come, and that repairing of catchment is not planting trees. It is doing soil moisture conservation works. It is making sure that the biodiversity comes back. It comes back in one season quickly, and then it takes about 2 or 3 seasons, and the face of the subcontinent could be changed. I believe that between 20 and 30 million jobs could be created, and we have the ability now to directly make that money go into their bank accounts. And I think we should be working together to see that the byproducts of the livelihoods that we do create is enhanced biodiversity, which enables biosphere to be rejuvenated, and the technosphere to go down on its knees and say, I exist only because you exist. Thank you.
Thank you, Thank you, Vituji, for a very nice introduction about how what should be our future philosophy when we deal with sustainability and development. Now we'll hear from Ashish. Ashish.
Thanks a lot. So I'm going to build on what some of my colleagues have said and try not to repeat, mostly in agreement with what has already been said. I think the way Bittu has laid out the issue of what our technosphere or what our economy, what development has done and continues to do to biodiversity and to the lives of people who are most dependent on biodiversity, and of course to all of us in direct or indirect ways, is absolutely on spot. And but what I want to do to start with is to actually shift to a slightly more hopeful series of stories, and then build on that to look at what I think needs to be done. And I'm going to start this, especially building on what Vijayanandji said about grassroots initiatives. Let me see if I can share the screen to show you what I mean. Please tell me if you're actually seeing these images.
Seeing the screen, but not necessarily in the size that we can read it.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is, I'm going to give you 3 or 4 examples of where grassroots initiatives are actually managing to combine conservation with well-being. And I'm not talking about economic growth, but actual genuine human well-being. This is a scene from Gadchiroli in Maharashtra, Eastern Maharashtra, a forest that is being conserved by a local community, Gond Adivasis. And they have been doing that for the last 30 years. It used to be managed by the forest department. Today, it's the village community that completely manages it. And there are many around that in the Gadchiroli area or the Chandrapur area or the Melghat area, which are in fact fairly similar. Why do these people do this? One, and they have also gone out on a limb fighting mining, fighting against the logging industry, and even against the forest department, which wanted to either give away the bamboo for harvest by industry and so on and so forth. Why do they do that? Because their basic livelihoods are ultimately dependent on this, on a day-to-day basis, and in the long run. In a nearby area in Gadchiroli, there is a Korchi Mahagram Sabha of 90 villages that have actually got together, formed a federation of Gram Sabhas across the whole region to protect the forest against mining, to protect the forest against logging, and using the Forest Rights Act to claim collective rights, not individual, but collective rights, to be able to actually manage to protect the forest against all these external vested interests that were otherwise coming in there. In Odisha, there are all women's forest protection committees. The men failed to protect the forest from the timber mafia. The women have actually taken the bold step of stopping the timber mafia from cutting down the forest. And they're saying these forests are our mother. We will not allow them to be cut. There are lots and lots of examples like this, still marginal, but nevertheless a lot. If we shift to agro-biodiversity, agricultural biodiversity, which Vandana spoke eloquently about, this is Vinodamma, a Dalit small farmer from Telangana who grows 40 species and varieties of crops on her dryland farm. No external irrigation. All the seeds are belonging to these Dalit women farmers. They've created the community structures and systems by which to do this kind of agriculture, agro-biodiverse, organic, completely sustainable farming. Vinodamma has a family of 8 people on 3 acres of land. She feeds all the 8 people through the whole year and manages to sell 2 lakh rupees worth of crops into the market. This year, with COVID, 2 months of lockdown, none of the 3,000 Dalit households in which this agricultural revolution have taken place are facing a food shortage. Not just that, they're actually feeding those who are landless, and they're feeding 1,000 glasses of millet porridge every day to municipal workers, health workers, and police workers in Zahirabad town. This is the same community that 30 years back was facing starvation, and as Dalits facing social ostracization, as women facing patriarchy. You should see the revolution that's taken place there. There's actually I'm sorry, this is a small image, should be much bigger. There's actually hundreds of such examples around the country of people protecting natural ecosystems, protecting wildlife, protecting or conserving agricultural biodiversity, and using the resources in the same way. This is not the same model as this exclusionary protection where people are kicked out. And I'm sorry that this might be a difference of opinion with me and Bittu or others. I do not believe that that model is going to be successful over the long run. Of course, if there are unsustainable practices, and there are many of them, those need to be curtailed. They have to have dialogues in which you can actually be able to make them sustainable. But kicking people out is not the option as far as I'm concerned. We need to go the way of collaborative management and community management of the kind that is shown in these hundreds of examples. But let's get to an area where I think we all would have to agree. And this is where maybe there's a slight disagreement with Vinod. Economic growth simply is not viable. We cannot have an approach which says India still needs economic growth, because economic growth is exactly what you're seeing in this picture here. This is an advertisement from 30 years back, but the reality is still very much exactly the same. That if development has to happen, if a pipeline has to be laid, if a highway has to be made, if Char Dham has to be made accessible to everybody all through the year instead of just 6 months when it was actually supposed to be, if a bullet train has to be made, then forests, wetlands, people's ecosystems, farms will be the first ones to be sacrificed, not cities. If mining, if minerals, if gold is found under the Rashtrapati Bhavan, the president will not be asked to move out. But if it's found under an Adivasi hamlet, they will be in fact forcibly shifted out. This model of development is violence both for nature and for local communities that live with and within nature. And to my mind, unless we fundamentally challenge this, not talking about green growth, that is an oxymoron. It's a contradiction in terms. Unless we fundamentally challenge it to say we need pathways of well-being that work within nature, that work within the ecosystems, and that work for equality, not the kind of abysmal inequality we have in which 1% of India now owns 90% of its wealth. That's absolutely ridiculous. We have to find those. We also need to support the movements of resistance. This is from 30 years back, a movement by Adivasis in central India on the Indravati River to protest against two massive hydroelectricity projects that were to come up there, Ichapalli and Bhopalpatnam. They were successful in stopping those dams. They are a conservation movement because not only were they able to save their own livelihoods, they saved all the forests that you see in the background, which are today part of the Indravati Tiger Reserve. That Tiger Reserve would not exist were it not for this movement 35 years back. So to my mind, these are also conservation movements. But then we also need more proactive movements of constructive building of alternatives which meet people's needs and aspirations in ways that are ecologically sustainable. And there are again hundreds and hundreds of examples of this around the country. I don't have the time to go into those. One of the important things I do want to say, however, is that it's a sign of the times of our elitism, and I'm including myself here, that Biju, when you said that the who's who of conservation is in this panel, that's not true. There are thousands and thousands of people who've actually put their lives in the forefront, protesting against destructive projects, doing the local conservation. The Vinodamma of the world should have been here. The Devaji Tofa, who protects that 2,000 hectares, should have been on this panel. Why only those of us who are sitting in cities, living extremely destructive lifestyles, as Bittu said, suddenly become the biodiversity experts and not those who are actually doing it on the ground, right? And so we need, and this is my last couple of slides, we need a fundamental transformation of various kinds. We need a transformation in governance. For instance, our democracy today is about voting once in 5 years and hoping to hell that those who vote in New Delhi will do the right things, as we know they don't. Currently, the government is very, very busy dismantling all the environmental laws. They can put 6,000 crores into a biodiversity mission, but if they dismantle the Environmental Impact Assessment and the Biodiversity Act and the Wildlife Act and the Right to Information Act and everything else, that mission is going to be achieving nothing at all. We need a radical democracy in which people who are in and around the biodiversity are the ones who are the central to decision making. Second, we need an economic democracy, which means localization. Vijayanand ji said very clearly, unless we actually say that people become self-reliant, clusters of 20 villages, 30 villages and a small town become self-reliant in basic needs, we will continue to face the crisis we're facing right now with COVID. where because my need is coming from 2000 kilometers away, or because I don't have a sustainable livelihood in my own village, and so I have to migrate to Mumbai to work, and now I'm locked up and I can't get back home, we will continue facing these crises. COVID crisis is less about the medical problem. It's more about the kind of socio-economic system of which has created the inequalities and the vulnerabilities in which hundreds of millions of people today face a serious crisis. So we need that fundamental shift in economy. We need the fundamental shift in social justice, casteism, gender inequality. Why do we only have 2 women on this panel and not at least half, etc., etc. These are also the sorts of transformations we need. Fourth, culture and knowledge. We seem to think that biodiversity conservation is only about modern science and technology. That's not the case. Traditional science, traditional wisdom, traditional knowledge systems, all kinds of different knowledge systems have to be part of this, of the biodiversity conservation. Language diversity has to be part of it. Food diversity has to be part of it. And of course, the fifth sphere is about ecology, without which we're all dead. And here I totally agree with what Bittu is saying. So let me just end by pointing to a website which has 1,400 examples of these local grassroots initiative at ecologically more sustainable and socio-economically much more equitable ways of well-being. I don't call it development, but of well-being. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ashish, for highlighting the pathways of well-being, which we will discuss in the next round. May I now ask Dr. Gigi Gangadharan to forward his views? Dr. Gigi.
It has been a learning process for me than I advocate something here, but I would like to.
Can't hear you.
Can you hear me? Can all of you hear?
It's very low, Gangadhar.
Yeah. You may need to go closer to the mic.
Yeah.
Can you hear now?
Yeah, better now. Better now.
Thank you. Yeah. Now, the given limited time, I would like to present a perspective of Indian, I should say Indian ethnocentric worldview, India's worldview, and how it perceives the environment around us, the system, how it is not a human-centered ecosystem as we are seeing, or Indian science are seeing. I think that is the need, which will add a lot of perspective to what just now Ashish has been telling. And I think we have to understand the 10,000s of years of civilizational wisdom that we have accumulated by cross-cultural kind of interaction between communities, societies, and intellectual levels of people, from grassroots to the highly scientific streams. So Ayurveda starts the first instance. Charaka says that Purushoyam Loga Samhita. He said the human being, the living being, is a micro of the macro, the larger environment around. And it says that, it explains, Yavando Logaha Murtimadam Dehe, Tavando Loge, and Yavando Loge, Tavando Dehe. All the living system and the external environment human being is in a continuum. And it says that how to one should consume or live in the ecosystem. That is by it is equated to a condition, a situation called milking a cow. When we milk a cow, we are not destroying it in any way, and we are actually relieving that that system by relieving it, and we are taking advantage of that milk. Even the calf of the cow, if it drinks all the milk of that cow, it cannot digest it. So nature is giving them enough, even to given to human beings. So we do dohanam. And dohanam is a state of mind where we use when we use resources from our environment. That's how we look at it. And there is no kind of space for greed. You collect with reverence, you use what is needed for you and don't go beyond your need. So this sustainable kind of utilization, sustainable kind of using the resources has been the center of India's living philosophy. And it is said that whatever pathway you take, don't go to the extremes and always go to the middle path, sarva karyeshu madhyama or sarva dharmeshu madhyama. This is another concept, the science of Indian origin many times, not only Ayurveda, it promotes. It says that don't go to beyond a limit which loses your balance. You go take the middle path so that there is no over exploitation of resources by any way. And it also goes to a state of mind where it says that Atmaval Sadadam Pashed Avi Kida Kipiligam. This is one stance from Ayurveda. This stance you may see in Dharma Shastra, you may see in other literature also, where it says that if you are able to perceive others as yourself, if you reflect yourself in others, you will reach a state of mind so that you cannot exploit and take undue advantage of others. This is the way we look at living beings around us. One of the example I could quote this evening, I took this quote from Vagpada. Even if you have to remove a tree from its natural habitat for a purpose of a larger good, actually you have to go and apologize to that living being and ask not only the tree, but also the living things, birds, small animals, and other things, terrestrial and extraterrestrial beings, celestial beings, ask them to leave that space, give them 24 hours so that the bigger purpose is met with the apologetic mind, but with a larger cause, we remove it. And we say that even if we remove, always sustainability has been one of the parameters Ayurveda uses. What I want to communicate through few of this slide is that there is a mindset, a psyche that has evolved from our roots, which make us to live with what is needed, don't go beyond the need, and make sure that you always live in a sustainable mode. The present day issues come when we lose this basic philosophy which keep the human system in tune with the living system around, and we try to dominate. We think that we are the master of the place, not the partner in the largest scale. And if you see even when it talks about Dinajatya, the daily routine, when it talks about seasonal routine, everywhere we can see this connectivity with the fellow beings. So this kind of mindset, if we can create, we will have a better world. And there are a lot of instances one can take from the India's large treasure house of knowledge that has been accumulated over thousands of years of interacting with the nature. I think it is important for all of us to look into this historical knowledge that has been created in this land and how to put into use, become a tool for communication of this concept of living with the nature as a partner of ours. Be only one of the elements in the whole system will be of great use to for our futuristic vision. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you, Dr. Gigi. And we will now move on to Deepak Apte, who is the director of Bombay Natural History Society.
Thank you, Biju. Well, I think before I start, I just would like to make a statement that in the current COVID pandemic, I think it just took less than 60 days for a tiny microscopic soul to bring the whole world economy and arrogance of human to its needs. I think that's the power of nature we should never underestimate and undermine. And this is not definitely the last pandemic, as most of the people have said. We are much larger super monsters in waiting. As soon as the permafrost start getting melted, sooner or later. I think with this preamble, there are 5 or 6 important points that I want to make in terms of mainstreaming biodiversity. I think mainstreaming biodiversity is quite complex word for many to understand, even at policy making level. And I'm going to give slightly different perspective. I think most of our debate surrounds around terrestrial life because that's what is mostly accessible. Very few people I heard speaking what happens underwater. And in fact, if we feel that land degradation is going to be one of the biggest challenge for humanity, I think degradation of ocean will bring kind of misery one cannot even imagine, because all life on land, what we see, actually has majorly influence of what happens inside the ocean. And the best signature you can get for climate change actually are not on land, but underwater at the depth of 30 meter, 40 meter, 50 meter. And one should really look at conservation of marine and ocean biodiversity is again of great significance in that context. There's another point, which I would like to emphasize as a part of this debate is that we look at only economic fallout currently. Uh, I mean, that's what most of us are worried about what's going to happen to our economic because of this 60 days lockdown. And we still don't know how long these uncertainties will go on. But imagine what kind of economic losses we'll have to bear when climate change will unleash its fury on this planet. And we can only comprehend of the kind of consequences that communities and people will have to face if climate uncertainties and unpredictability start showing its fury to nature. We have been seeing this of late recently, the consequences of climate change and climate vagaries. But there's far worse to come if we do not really look at climate change very, very seriously and investing into dealing and mitigating this climate change. And I strongly believe that more than land, I think the climate solutions will come from ocean. We only have about 30% land, 70% is ocean. And within that land, we probably have less than 10% land which has a potential to sequester carbon. A bulk of the potential, therefore, rests in ocean. But that also brings in different kinds of problems of ocean acidification and how we are going to deal or how we are going to neutralize those issues. The answer rests in saving life underwater. And that's, I think, one of the key area which we still don't even have on radar of our planners or our thinkers. And that's something I think we need to look at very, very carefully. I think the entire definition of GDP needs to change in the context of this COVID pandemic. I think GDP minus ecosystem services and climate change related unpredictability is nothing but just one figure which makes no sense at any point of time. And therefore, I think whatever GDP we speak about has to be inclusive of these two fundamental signatures of very existence, that we today are facing and struggling for. There are few opportunities that we need to look at in terms of integration of or mainstreaming of biodiversity into conservation. I think today's situation or this pandemic provides us a fantastic opportunity to strengthen our agriculture. I think this is one sector which we have ignored completely in terms of investment. And Ashish and other speakers have made very pointed view is how we can, instead of doing a commercial agriculture on a large scale, how we can go for the small scale agriculture which has got virtually no ecological footprint, but in fact it has got far better contribution to nature conservation and solution per se. We need to look at ecotourism into slightly more broader context to see how we can and decentralized ecotourism model rather than 5-star ecotourism model. How we can look at minor forest produce as right to forest dwelling communities, because that's another aspect we need to look at in terms of streaming biodiversity conservation. And then there will be plenty of solution for nature-based solution to deal with this problem. I'm not going to dwell upon some of these details, but there are two pointed examples I want to explain here is to how we are still a long way away from even thinking about mainstreaming biodiversity. And one classic example I can give where we have an opportunity even today, right at this point of time. Look at, for example, one of the most eco-friendly fishing that is happening today in Lakshadweep Islands of India. we call pole and line fishing. This is one of the most eco-friendly fishing that I have ever seen in the entire fishing sector. With zero bycatch, they catch only what they can carry in their small boats. And one of the fishing practice which actually allowed tuna populations to sustain across its migration routes. What are we doing today in terms of fishing sector in Lakshadweep? We are trying to promote long line, which has been proved as one of the most destructive fishing globally. We are trying to introduce long line into the island, which currently are practicing some of the best fishing practices. So instead of incentivizing one of the most eco-friendly fishing, we are actually disincentivizing them by allowing them to do long line, catch more and more, and finish the stocks that we have for this migratory fish tuna. Another example, for example, if you look at, there's a great opportunity for us to look at climate change as a lot of people call it an adversary. I think there are certain areas we can make this as a win-win situation for our coastal farming community. We clearly have seen indications, and I can speak with authority from Maharashtra because we have a lot of data on that how sea level rise has been invading the agriculture field in coastal areas. Today we have a huge conflict of this agrarian community with the planners because they say my agriculture land is completely destroyed because of salinity. But this salinity is actually allowing to grow mangrove and saline vegetation very profusely in those areas. Instead of giving them a subsistence based livelihood for this saline areas, we are trying to tell them that look, mangroves are protected by high court order, so you cannot cut a single tree, or you cannot do this and that. What kind of support you'll get from this agrarian community whose massive lands are getting saline and lost to the invasion of mangroves? I think we have to create a flexible system where these people are able to do a more holistic integrated agriculture. It's completely new system for them. These people have never practiced coastal agriculture. They're mostly terrestrial agriculture, but we need to actually build their skills to make sure that this change reality, they doesn't become enemies for nature and mangrove ecosystem in these areas. These people will have to accept that sea level rise is a reality. No amount of bunds and sea walls are going to stop ingress of sea into our agriculture ecosystem. It's a reality that will come to us. If not today, in next 20 years, bulk of these areas will be saline, including our groundwater. But there is a solution. I think there are good amount of examples available globally how mangrove ecosystem can provide a wonderful economy without cutting down those trees. I think that fundamental shift, the way we look at this, needs to be developed over a course of time. And plenty of example can be given, especially in Southeast Asia, the countries which are struggling with sea level rise, how they are coping up with use of mangroves for various purposes. And these are all cottage industries. We are not talking about large scale industrial agriculture. We are talking about developing small scale cottage industries for this agri support group that we are talking about. I think there are two fundamental problems that we have in terms of mainstreaming biodiversity. I think if we have to look at, for example, at government side, where you require mainstreaming of biodiversity, I think you require mainstreaming of biodiversity in the basic tenet of our Environmental Protection Act. Look at the quality of EIS that we do for our project, developmental project. I would say with great authority, because I'm part of many of these committees, almost 60 to 70% EIS are plagiarized. They are copy paste and scientifically completely inaccurate. We have been raising this issue ministry on several occasions, that unless we have a quality and rigor into EIS, no matter what we do, we will never have quality mitigation measures, because our basics itself are not right and fundamentally not in right place for us to provide any mitigation measures. So even if you want to develop it legitimately, relatively less invasive kind of an industry, it's still a distant dream, because our basics in terms of EIS are fundamentally wrong. So if you have to mainstream biodiversity at one place with priority, I think that is what we have to do. It is under our acts. Environmental Protection Act requires a strengthening. EI has to be done independently. Today, industry do the EI, and why the hell they will do the EI that doesn't suit their requirement? Unless EI itself become disfranchised from this existing system, we will continue to have this problem. And the last point I want to make, which again is very important for all of us to contemplate on. I think bulk of our resources have been completely exploited outside protected area. And if you see the map of India versus the last remaining resources, exploitable resources, so-called, for various purposes, are remaining under protected areas. So our conflict with protected areas and resource extraction are going to be absolute and 100%. Now, in this changed reality, our battle lines are already drawn, because no matter where project comes, it's not question of whether it's Himalaya, Northeast, or Central India, or Western Ghats, or Eastern Ghats. Wherever you start any number of projects, any category of project, we will have conflict with some or other important biodiversity hotspot areas or key biodiversity areas. Now, given that reality, I think mainstreaming biodiversity is going to be a huge challenge. But as Ashish has said, we require a revolutionary approach to dealing with this problem. If we try to solve this problem within our existing framework, I don't think we are going to go anywhere, and will continue to deplete our natural assets and natural capital. And climate change, of course, will unleash the kind of fury which one cannot even imagine. I have been working underwater for 30 years, and I have seen those dramatic changes happening in seascape underwater, which I cannot even explain in words how things are getting changed underwater. And, and that's not a good sign, because if we start only finding solution on land, the furies that degradation of ocean will bring will be of such an unprecedented scale that there won't be any mitigation measure left for us to do. And this is exactly what I think Bittu has quoted it much eloquently than me. I think we are cutting across intergenerational equity. I have seen some of the amendments to the EIA notifications, which allows now mining or some of these leases to span to almost 70 years. I mean, how can today we allow a lease of 70 years when I won't be alive by then? I'm actually giving away rights of my children and grandchildren for the sake of today's economic stability. I think this is one of the fundamentally most skewed and absurd kind of decision making today we have, which needs to be looked into completely through a different lens. I don't know. I'm not as as eloquent as probably Ashish has put down in a completely different perspective than Bittu and other speakers. But I live a real life today, and this real life solutions are going to be very, very different. I don't know whether we can still go back to the life that we existed about 100 or 200 years ago, nor today's life is kind of thing which we can live for a very long period of time. I think a middle path has to be found at some point of time. And ignoring ocean, I think biggest mistake we are making today in all our policy discussions and debates and is that we are ignoring oceans completely. I don't see anything on oceans in any of these policies in this country except lip service, and they continue to degrade relentlessly. Thank you, Biju.
Thank you, Deepak. It's true that even the Sustainable Development Goals and the assessment, the only part which is totally missing is actually below underwater biodiversity from India. Thank you. Now we'll move on to Dr. Pishupati. He's online. Dr. Balakrishna Pishupati.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, and a very happy International Day for Biodiversity to all of you. I've been listening very carefully to all the interventions. Sorry for being late because I was a part of another panel. And one thing if COVID had done to all of us and the lockdown had done to all of us is that the demand on both time and their ability to participate in multiple events seems to have exponentially increased. Earlier, we at least could do only one event a day, but today we are doing about 4 or 5 events a day. Thank you very much, and thanks, Dr. Biju, for the invitation. Having listened to the panel members, I thought that I'll take a little bit of a different take because a lot of you focused on local, very eloquently put examples, experiences, at the national level, the challenges we face, the opportunities, certainly very relevant and to a large extent very true. But as I was listening, I was just reminded of a very interesting question that was asked by the late Nobel laureate, Professor Wangari Maathai, exactly 10 years ago, 2010, because many of you would recognize 2010 was the International Year for Biodiversity. So I was heading the biodiversity program at UNAP. So we organized a ministerial panel and she was also a part of the panel. And that was the time when the report on the ecosystems, the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity was also being finalized to be presented to the conference of parties in Nagoya in Japan. And her question was very simple to the panel members. As I said, they were all ministers. And with the economists who were there presenting the report, she said that, look, the indications of the productivity, the goods and services that ecosystems and biodiversity could offer, according to varied estimates, runs into billions and trillions of dollars every year. Very, very interesting numbers. And numbers, as everyone knows, gets the antennas of not just politicians, but a lot of common men also out. And today, thanks to the report of Lord Stern, the kind of focus on climate change is because he said we're going to lose percentages of GDP if we do not act on climate change. But her question was that, yes, we do agree that biodiversity contributes so much, but we also know globally if we are going to take the biodiversity hotspots, the so-called mega biodiverse countries, 17 of them, but majority of people living in these countries who manage these resources to a certain extent, depending on your country context, own these resources, why are they still poor? If biodiversity is worth billions and trillions, why is it people in these countries are still poor? And of course, you know, economists as smart as they are came a pat reply saying that, look, what we are presenting is the potential of biodiversity and ecosystems. But it is up to the practitioners and policymakers to transform that potential into something real. So today, we actually need to revisit that question, but in a little bit of a different context. For a lot of us working in environment, the biggest fear we had as and when the lockdown started and COVID started was not so much, of course, it does linger at the back of our minds, on the hardships of people, the migration, the loss of jobs. But the biggest fear we had was that if at all, definitely there is going to be, but it is on the timeline when the recovery is going to be happening, when countries are going to come up with economic revival packages. If there is one thing that is going to take a big hit, it is going to be environment. Because the first call for anybody is to get back the jobs, to push the economy, to do whatever you can do. And already we are seeing the indications, including in a country like India. So the biggest discussion that happened post-lockdown was that how do we deal with this kind of a situation? Because already for environment and biodiversity conservation, we feel, even though it is not real to a large extent, we feel there is very limited money that is available. There is a lot of money available, but we do not know how to deploy those resources. 2012, when India was hosting the Biodiversity Conference of Parties in Hyderabad, when I was at the National Biodiversity Authority, we did a study. Of course, it was not published for various reasons, conducted by Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. There very clearly, there was an indication that at the federal level, at the union level, we are looking at an annual expenditure, annual resource availability for biodiversity conservation was anywhere between 11 to 15,000 crores. But that is considering all the monies available across different ministries on issues working on conservation and biodiversity. But of course, it was very alarming. And certainly a lot of people felt that, no, we should not put that number out because that means that everybody is going to say environment has too much of money. So let's not discuss any of that. So the report never saw the light of the day. The reason I mentioned is that today, environmentalists are very, very scared in terms of how the post-COVID recovery is going to be. And for a lot of us who are conservationists, And for those of us who are generalists, a lot of time we feel happy that we are seeing a lot of positives. Pollution is less, species are coming back, rivers are coming back to life, we are able to sort of see a lot of wildlife roaming around. Perfectly, yes. But think of that particular situation and ask somebody who is an illiterate, who doesn't know anything about biodiversity, who doesn't know anything on the environment, and ask a very simple question, which is based on his cognitive capacity to understand and reflect and react. And it is a very, very important question. He said, look, the world is under lockdown for the last 2 months, 10 weeks, whatever, 12 weeks. But within 10 or 12 weeks, you're able to see the environment reviving itself. So to that person who may not be one of us, who actually understood some of these dynamics very differently because of our training and backgrounds, the question will be very simple. If I'm going to do something, if I'm going to reduce doing something in a matter of 5 or 6 or 10 weeks, biodiversity is gaining. So why is that I should bother about putting money in long-term conservation? Because the indication seems to be that very quickly nature is reviving. And I was just off a panel, the ministerial panel with the minister from Costa Rica, where she said that nature will heal itself. Back came a question from the audience saying that, okay, if nature is able to heal itself, what is it we are going to do? So the first or one of the key challenges that we will face is that how do we communicate some of it to the general public out there? Very valid question. And he's going to come from a non-expert. A lot of us may not like that question, but that is a potential question that we are going to be asking. And the reason I mentioned those two are the first time we actually are seeing at the global level, and I'll focus a little bit on the global level so that I give you a little bit of a perspective of where we are with some of those discussions happening now and in the last few weeks and the weeks to come. There is one thing which is really taking very, very important root. That is finding integrated solutions. For a large number of years, people who actually are working on environment have been putting together, and the World Health Organization in its assembly had also adopted formally what they call as a One Health approach. You can't deal with some of these independent of each other. You can't address human health without addressing animal health. You can't address animal health without looking at plant health. But we never found a traction, we never found a resonance anywhere in the way we actually started developing our policies, either of conservation or for health. And today, the International Day for Biodiversity, message after message coming from not just global leaders like the Secretary General himself or the discussions in the World Health Assembly as it is meeting this week, is very simple, is that, look, we actually have burnt our hands and fingers. It is important for us to look at integrated solutions for some of these problems. You cannot work on biodiversity conservation ignoring veterinary sciences or the way we need to deal with ethno-veterinary medicine. You can't deal with economic development until we also focus on the way we can deal with managing our resources more sustainably. And all of this is happening in the backdrop of two very important issues that are emerging globally. One, the high-level political forum. Many of you are aware of the Sustainable Development Goals adopted in 2015. So the UN every year has a review meeting, which is not a binding meeting, a review meeting, which is a voluntary review, where countries need to put together a report to say what they are doing to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And India is going to be presenting their report in July this year. And for the first time, even though concerns were raised for many years that the environmental dimension of the SDGs were very poorly reflected in the national reviews, and conservation, environment, and biodiversity are intricately linked to achieving all the 17 goals, not just goal 14 on life underwater and goal 15 on terrestrial life on land, but it is intricately linked to all the 17 goals. It took 5 years for the high-level political forum to basically discuss some of these issues again in an integrated fashion. So for the first time, the high-level political forum in this year, July meeting, is going to address on thematic issues, clustering elements of SDGs. And one positive signal coming out of it is that the first time we are really going to be looking at integrating some of these issues, both the concerns and also the opportunities to deal with better ways of managing environment. The second track is the entire global agenda setting on biodiversity conservation. Like it or not, we may not like global processes, we may not like, but global processes dictate to a large extent terms to countries on what or how they will respond to some of these issues. The Convention on Biological Diversity, 196 countries are parties. It's a legally binding convention. So technically speaking, if countries do not do something, they can be hauled up because it's a legally binding convention. They are going to be meeting in China in 2021. They should have met this year, but unfortunately, because of the closed down, we are not able to meet, and they're going to meet in 2021. And what is the major agenda on that particular platform? To set the goals for the next 10 years. And already there is a draft set of 20 goals, 20 targets that actually are in circulation for countries and stakeholder groups to comment on, to provide inputs to. But the critical element, which is receiving a lot more of attention thanks to COVID, thanks to some of this lockdown today, is not about how smart we are going to be in getting the language. Many times in UN, we worry about the language, than the meaning and the content. The language, if it correct, is not so much in terms of getting the smart wordings of the targets, but how do we ensure that countries commit themselves more formally and openly so that they can be questioned openly and publicly as and when they start implementing some of these targets 2021 to 2030. And we all know we miserably failed 2002 to 2010 when we had set the first set of global targets. And we definitely are going to go out to 2021 COP and say that we again failed 2011 to 2020. So please give us another chance. So certainly countries are embarrassed because parties and ministries of environment take the ownership saying that they are the custodians and they are the ones to deal with environment and conservation when it comes to multilateral processes. But today they are realizing that perhaps that is not a good take. Because many times we use this particular phraseology that if we win, we all win. But if you fail, you fail. So winning is always collective, but failing is always personalized and individual. So countries for the first time are sitting and discussing, especially very clearly in the European Union, where they say that we need to have commitments that are going to bind us. We can't have these sound bites out over there all the time without doing action. And if there is one region, again, we have to wait and see whether the words mean action or whether they're just words for getting the media space or social media bites. That's a different thing. But if there is one region which to an extent is beginning to walk the talk, it's European Union. Those of you who follow some of the activities, some of the economic packages that are being put together, and the reason I'm mentioning it is India does have very important lessons to learn. We don't have to copy what they're doing, but we do have certain lessons. Very clearly, country after country are saying that economic package, economic recovery, bailing out of businesses, whether you are an airline business or otherwise, unless you are going to be committing yourselves and you're going to agree to certain environmental rules, procedures, and goals, we will not provide the economic incentive for you to revive. And we have seen it, for example, airline after airline struggling. Lufthansa was very clearly told by Germany, you have to agree for this, otherwise you're not going to get the economic package. Lufthansa said, no, we have to think about it, and still they have not recovered, they have not gotten back. And the reason I'm mentioning is that today we are in a situation in India where it's all about economics, economics, and economics. And there is very little environment. Even the little environment we have, the fear is that are we going to water down the environmental dimension? Are we going to be struggling more? Are we going to be talking about how many more things are not happening in a country like India? Then 1 year down the line, 5 years down the line, we'll sit and say, oh, no, things are different, things are going to happen in India. So my sort of 3 or 4 parting points. It's very important to look at conservation, but it is not at the cost of economic recovery. But you cannot look at economic recovery without understanding what are specifics at the local and national levels. Because to a large extent, some of these are very specific to a province, to a state, or to a country, so they need to be looked at in a very tailor-made fashion. The second one is that we also need to have coalitions. Many of you who actually are a part of non-governmental organizations or who run organizations actually know the kind of responses the current government has when it comes to funding and securing even an FCRA approval kind of a thing. We never used to get a reply for years to come. But today, Niti Aayog is sending mails to a lot of NGOs almost on a daily basis saying that, no, we can't work without civil society. We can't work without NGOs. You are a part of this game. We want you to come and help us in recovery. And that is a game changer. But is it going to stop as and when we ease out the lockdown and ease out the migrant crisis and others is something which we have to see. But this is an opportunity also for the policymakers to think that collective action is something which is very important. And lastly, and most importantly, the entire multilateralism is being redefined because of this COVID. The entire diplomacy is being redone in the way countries respond to some of it. The science diplomacy is completely going to be on. So what is important for us to look at is that how do we actually take some of these signals and some of these cues so that our recovery, whether it is at the local level or at the national level or state level, is going to be long-term and sustainable. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Pishupati, speaking specifically on the greater changes or the transformational changes and integrated solutions, which we will discuss now. And we are left with one panelist who is to speak, Suprabha.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll take a slightly different approach. I've been preceded by such amazing experts, and also where I'm from, the Gurukula Botanical Sanctuary, there are such extraordinary experts there. But I'll communicate something of concern that I have. Yesterday was World Bee Day. Today is World Biodiversity Day. Not long ago was Mother's Day. Somebody has declared all these days and we're grateful. And yet biodiversity goes down. 40% of insects face extinction. Every day 200 species go extinct according to the IUCN. And mothers will soon be replaced by machines. I've lived for nearly 30 years in Wayanad on the banks of a lovely little stream that comes out of an ancient forest and in a community that serves endangered plants and habitat and also humans. It's 300 kilometers away from Bangalore, which is where I am right now. I've not been there for 2 months. I hope it's still there when I go back. With all the environmental clearances that are going on during lockdown, I can't be too sure. Not long ago, a railway line has been projected for that area too. And so my forest home might be replaced by tracks and stations and electric lines and bridges and tunnels and parking lots and tinsel shops. Normal life in this place in Kerala is to live in close connection with thousands of different species. In fact, if you count individuals, it'll be millions and millions of non-humans. Also with different peoples who live amongst these and work for them or with them in some way. Now I'm in the city. For the first few days, each time I come here, it's a shock. The lack of diversity, the reversal of representations between humans and non-humans. Here are thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people, and non-humans trying to find some space in between. So one's baseline of diversity shifts dramatically. And though I know that there can be surges of diversity even in the city, the baseline is reset when an area is destroyed completely to make way for the roads and buildings. So, and this is my central concern, is that children who grow up in these places cannot perceive life diversity in the way indigenous peoples can, though they can spot gadget or car diversity. So who or what we perceive determines our relationships and behavior, and we protect only what we can perceive. So I don't really want to talk about the forest. I want to talk about this community of beings in this part of Bangalore. We're so used to being fed amazing stories about creatures far away, and I've certainly done that, told stories of giant earthworms and bee orchids and lion-tailed macaques and elephants and tree ferns and the amazing diversity of the tropical rainforest to people far away. But it's also necessary to remember that we are amazing creatures ourselves, mammal, human members of life's community, and also that we are surrounded by other amazing creatures wherever we are, whose lives are interwoven with ours, if only we choose to see. As an educator, one of my greatest concerns is the end of experiencing itself. And I'd like to propose that this is at the root of the decimation of the world. Hence, the wake-up calls from viruses and winds and sun and waters running fast and furious, calling us to our senses, hammering our boxed-in brains open, blasting our comfort zones so we can see again, feel again, sense again, hear and come back to the basics. To be alive is to be here now, not in some la-la land of virtuality. So walking in the streets of Bangalore, even in this corner of a megalopolis, I meet a variety of living beings, elemental, cosmic, organic, ecologic. It is still diverse outside compared to inside the house, which is pretty lifeless, other than human bodies and a few houseplants and all those whom we consider vermin. So I've been walking during lockdown. I walk further and further every day. And now it's 65 days since I got into a vehicle. I follow all the rules. I have a mask on, maintain distance. The short time I have outdoors is an explosion of sensory perception, especially when the traffic is down. Feeling the bark of a tree, sensing the swell and the dip of the ground, enjoying the breeze and the calls of the birds, following the passage of the sun in the sky, stepping through fallen flowers, walking past other humans, listening to them talk, connecting with dogs and cows. It's significantly richer outdoors. When I come inside to the house, it's to a space that is nearly totally an artifact, full of machines and things. Grinder, stove, geyser, computer, light, wall hangings, smooth wall, smooth floor, rectangular bed, shoes, cupboards, sinks, toilets, utensils, and so on. So I spend my whole time inside this space touching things. And now with COVID, not even touching the one human being I live together with, my mother in Bangalore. The complete replacement of the diversity of living beings by a diversity of machine things has consequence, ecological, social, and emotional, as well as to our health and psyche and spirit. What happens when you become a person relating to things rather than beings? What happens when your attention becomes drawn by screens, speakers, taps, pipes, cabinets, phones, fridges, and TVs, and not plants and animals and mountains and forests and rivers? You start to care for how your tap works, for the phone and its apps and its battery and internet connectivity, for the fridge and all the processed stuff inside, for switches, so you can make it dark when it is light outside and make it light when it is dark outside. For headphones to shut the rest of the soundscape out and enhance just one input. For the internet, the scintillating chance to go anywhere and meet anyone at will. To the depths of the universe and the nucleus of an atom, to the ocean deeps and the mountain tops, to peer into faces of people anywhere in the world and to play this over and over again at the click of a button. Meanwhile, the sun has gone down and the crows have gone to roost outside your window and a light drizzle has started and you are cozy in your la-la land, not smelling, not feeling, not sensing. So the end of experiencing or the transformation of an earthly embodied life to one that is machine-made and machine-driven is a deadly one. It goes with the end of the biosphere. We watch millions of men and women and children walking home, hundreds of kilometers on our screen, and still we don't move. We watch them while we are bound to our chairs. They are walking, but we are sitting. They are dying and being killed and falling exhausted and starving while we sit sipping our cool glasses of water. Likewise, we watch the living world being dismembered through the screens. Other creatures are moving too, trying to find a way to live, a new home. a new niche, a new nook, and to survive and thrive and to find ecological community. When you destroy the ants, the home of ants, they form a line and start walking. When you destroy habitat, the tigers and elephants move and they become a nuisance somewhere else. They become refugees. When you destroy a forest, the virus and other microbial members of the forest biome rush out, become feral, wild, unwanted, hated, a massive problem. We turn warlike on them. It's a strange situation right now. On the one hand, thanks to modern civilization, we have millions of people migrating all over the place, and now they're going back. And on the other hand, we have bazillions of non-humans also displaced and dying. So I'm a conservationist and an educator, and together with all my friends and comrades in this big fight against species extinction, I have sought to sustain not only the plants and animals and rivers and forests, but also our human experiencing of this immense and complex world of relationships and understandings and cosmologies and languages, and much more importantly, the perceptions grown out of these complex relationships. Such a perceiving is in itself in danger of being annihilated. If we cannot see other creatures, how can we protect them? If we cannot sense other beings, how can we know if they have become less or more? If we cannot smell and touch and hear and feel the presence of plants and animals and mists and clouds and oceans and find sustenance and beauty and company with them, how will we ever come to an understanding of how best to serve them? If we get water from a tap, why would we protect a river? We are forgetting the many ways of being human, to be human in the company of owls and whistling thrushes and tigers and sambar deer and buttress-rooted giant trees. Instead, we are humans boxed into little or large cubicles, and we no longer understand these wild others. We cannot see them. If we cannot see them, we cannot experience them. If we cannot experience them, our behavior will not alter, and we are dead to the cries of others. So during lockdown, what I discovered, and what I want to say is how habitat is always happening. It is a process. It is not a static, arrived at moment. And with each day in this little corner of Bangalore, I saw how in the cracks of pavements and walls and on parapets and rooftops, there were signs of diverse forms of life, from insect life to mammal life to tree life to moss life to fungi and annual herbs and succulents, and of course, bird life. I saw the flowering and fruiting of trees. I saw their seeds fall and saw them scatter and disperse. I saw the germination of seeds that had been waiting for the April showers. I saw little epiphyte communities on the enormous trunk of old rain trees, comprised of several herbaceous plants and climbers and also shrubs and trees. I saw ecology happening all around me in the city. So on World Biodiversity Day, I want to honor how life wants to live by calling to attention every vertical and horizontal surface around us, myriad toeholds for life. Around us is future forest, future thickets, future habitat of some kind. It might not be what you and I declare to be native or ancient, but in the same way that different cosmopolitan solidarity groups are coming together to address the terrible plight of people walking back to their original homelands, so too do these different trees and plants and animals and birds and insects. They are calling each other's attention to the terrible plight of the concreted over places, to the blown apart dwellings of other creatures, to the tarred spaces, gouged out spaces. They're calling attention to the gently undulating land that is below the city of Bangalore. And countless creatures are on the front line of making these areas livable again against impossible odds. So if we pause, as lockdown made us do, we see how leaf by leaf, seed by seed, branch by branch, tendril by tendril, feathered body by feathered body, the baseline keeps shifting towards more life. But we have to pause. We have to stop the harm. We have to hold back our own excesses. We have to halt the machines. The destruction of old growth habitat is non-negotiable, but neither is the destruction of this little bit of roadside thicket or this tree, which is a whole community in itself, and this garden, this park, these ancient rocks, the stream beds in the city of Bangalore, and the lakes and wetlands. We have to shake free from the concepts that we have created around ecology and natural history, because anyway, life is refusing to do what we want it to do. So we have to learn to relate afresh and feel close to other creatures and to each other, and to reach out through our senses, our wonderful senses, through our walking bodies and our extraordinary perceptual capacities, and also our imaginations. We have to get out of the machine. And as an educator, I feel this is incredibly important. In fact, we have to stop the machine and then get back to the land right where we consider home. Millions of our comrades and fellow citizens are showing the rest of us through their long marches home what they are not willing to accept and whom they love. We need to do this too. For a biodiverse future, we must disassemble the monster machines. Thank you.
Thank you, Suprabha. So poetical on way you describe the things. And then we are actually coming close to our time schedule. And what we will do now is we have a lot of questions, but we have unfortunately no time to answer all these things. But in a quick round, we'll hear from the panelists again, what exactly are the transformative measures which is required in the post-COVID era when we think about sustainability, we think about the livelihood of the local people, and also how we can have a kind of GDP for the poor. We'll start with Dr. Vandana.
Many of the false polarizations and dualisms of the past have anyway been shed. Constantly it was, we have to destroy the forest for a coal mine because it will generate jobs. We have to use chemical fertilizers in order to grow more food. All that is the past. Not only did that system not create more jobs, it destroyed livelihood, and what the little bit there was so degraded that the minute the COVID lockdown happened, people started to walk back home, as Suprabha so poetically said. And we are in this new cusp of an imagined digital world where 99% people will be useless. We must take seriously the statements of the tech giants, the Mark Zuckerbergs and the others who say we won't need 99% people. We'll have farming without farmers. We'll have factories without workers. And they're preparing for that, and the subsidies will move to become their subsidies. And my brain has gone crazy trying to figure out, how do you run a non-productive economy? Because it's a rent economy. All of them just collect rents and pirate our bodies and our minds. When Suprabha talked about the machine, I've just written a new piece, how the machine is going to decide. First of all, it'll pirate our data without our permission, and then it'll decide our value, whether we are worth living or not, through cyber currency. So we are at a very, very important threshold. No one can say, for jobs, I'll destroy this primeval forest. I'll drown this free-flowing river, because jobs are being destroyed everywhere. And all we have is the earth, her biodiversity, her ecosystems, and the diverse functions they offer. And I think it's a bit schizophrenic for India. To one hand, constantly talk about our civilization, and the other hand, destroy every value of that civilization to chase the yesterday of the West, as well as make yourself prey to tomorrow's serfdom. So we have to stop this divide between livelihoods and the environment, this divide between economy and life, which is a horrible divide. The economy of people is a biodiversity economy. It's the economy of the earth. There's an economy of piracy, of rent collection, of Lagan. That will grow even bigger. The US data is shocking. 40 million people have lost their jobs. The billionaires became richer by 434 billion in this short 1 month period. So what is the economy we're going to shape? I talked about the biodiversity economy, which means co-creation and co-production with life. We will have to give up the false construct. GDP is only a 50-year-old construct created by war on how to suck out the wealth of nature and the wealth of people. It is now time to give back to the earth, to give back to society. We do it in Navdanya. We can feed 2 times India. Farmers can have 10 times more income by taking care of the earth. The examples are all there. They've been tested and tried by millions of farmers over decades. I think it is time to stop talking of biodiversity as something out there. We are biodiversity, and biodiversity is in us. It's in our minds. It is the future.
Thank you, Vandana. We'll hear from Dr. Mathur now. What exactly, how are you going to address this kind of tipping points when we are in a very, that kind of a situation now?
See, while there are so many negative impacts and effects of the COVID and the lockdown that we have witnessed, there are some bright spots too. And that is the resurgence and revival of the wild animal species. The world has seen, the country has seen how different animal groups, individual animal species, from birds to mammal, have now bounced back. All the roads and highways and railways which our modern development had blocked, we now see this resurgence. But how long can this resurgence last? That is the big question. One thing it has shown for everyone that wild animal species can bounce back if we remove the human pressure out of it. But the question now is that as we start up our economy once again, this rapid pace of industrialization or urbanization or job creation may have a further impact on wild animal species, our ecosystems, and our natural capital. So that is where would be an area to worry and to see that we do not model further methods of governance and administration and management which can lead to further loss of forest and wildlife and animals. Because today, the COVID itself is a creation or human creation when we are combining the trade and domestic meat over there. And in the revival phase, we ought to be very, very careful that what kind of models we follow and what kind of process we follow. So we need to be very careful. We do need to revive our economy, but not at the cost of ecology. Otherwise, the cure might be better than the disease. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vinod Mathur. And we'll hear from Vijayanji how this kind of grassroots level interventions would be very much appreciated, especially in the post-COVID era. Right? You have to unmute. Vijayanji, you are not audible. You have to unmute first.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Just one point.
Yeah.
Go back to the local governance paradigm of a partnership of the Gram Panchayat, the community, particularly through the self-help groups, and the civil society, both the technical and others, helping them to realize this at the grassroots level. Money is there, resources are there, technical help needs to be provided by all those who believe in local action. That's my only comment.
Thank you, Vijayanji. Mashish. Ashish, we are not hearing you.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Okay.
All right. Yeah. I was saying that Vijayananji has already talked about going back to the Gram Sabhas and Panchayats and urban neighborhoods and so on. So I won't repeat that. But two additional points. One, how do we make whatever we do post-COVID relevant to the youth? We haven't really spoken much about it in this webinar. A lot of young people are asking this question. Young people are going back to the villages, who are going back home. Young pastoralists who are going back because they no longer have jobs in the cities. Young craftspersons, all kinds of people are actually heading back or have headed back. How do we actually create a situation by which they can have dignified local livelihoods that are based on nature, natural resources, and conservation? Which is what traditionally many of the communities have been doing. I think this is an incredible opportunity. And I'm afraid that the 2 lakh crore or whatever, that humongous amount of package that has been declared by the government simply does not cut the deal. It's much of it is hogwash. We need to see how we can make the advocacy push for actual policy shifts that enable this kind of localized, conservation-based, natural resource-based livelihoods possible. It is happening in hundreds of places. It's not rocket science. It's not something that's abstract. It's happening, as the examples that I gave, for instance. And we can definitely talk about how the same kinds of things can happen in different places, but modified for local ecological, cultural, and other sorts of diversity that exists around the country. So to me, that would be the most important thing. When we say self-reliance, when our Prime Minister says self-reliance, he seems to have a very different idea than actually what Gandhi meant and what these localized initiatives are talking about. Self-reliance needs to be about strengthening that local economy, which is based on the conservation of nature and natural resources. It's not about contract farming and helping the big corporates to be bailed out and big banks to be bailed out. That's not what a post-COVID economic recovery would be about. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Gigi, you have something to say as a concluding line?
Want to add that the food culture, the local food culture that has been very, very rich in our country, that has to be relooked whenever we have the new thinking of bringing back the self-reliance in food. Local food culture has been highly, I should say, highly affected by the so-called development scheme that we have. So food, which is very pertinent for health, which is based on local ecosystem, the prakriti of the person, the age of the person, this kind of culture is one of the things that we should bring back if you want to have a healthy future, especially in the context of these new kinds of immunity compromisation that is happening to the human being. That's all.
Thank you, Dr. Gigi. Dr. Balakrishna Pishpati.
Yes, thank you. I just have one point, and we're all talking about Build Back Better, the BQ, which is a tagline everywhere you see. But what is very important for all of us, but also people out there, is to define what that better means. A lot of it depends on how we define that new better, and how do we ensure that people translate that better into something which is real. Thank you.
Thank you. Deepak?
I think we have a wonderful opportunity to go back from industrial economy to more agriculture economy, and that to more of an organic agriculture economy. I don't think we will get probably much better opportunity than what we have today to go back and build on. We used to be an agriculture economy, really, and it's a great way to look at that way, with people going back to the villages. And as that Ashish has rightly said, I think our economic model has to be built very differently if we have to sustain this entire biodiversity and the planet.
Thank you. Suprabha? You have to, hello?
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay. So the thinking on universal income, universalized income for everybody, and forming groups of people who kind of pose the question to themselves as to what they want to do and recreate community in ecology, I don't see how else we can move forward, because there's so many people on the streets and so many communities and such disparity. Why not the universalized income? Another version of MNREGA, but people sitting together to see what they want to do with their lives rather than do something for other people elsewhere.
Thank you. Thank you. I take this opportunity now to thank actually many of the response from many of the participants show that some of the topics, especially creating ecological civilization and an economy based on the local livelihood, need some further discussion, and which probably we'll do in future as well. And also, just like what Ashish said, bringing the actual biodiversity people into the platform, which would always help in planning for the better tomorrow. And I thank all the panelists for your time. And I thank from the part of CISSA, from Indian Biodiversity Congress, Navdanya, and University of Kerala. I thank all the panelists for your time. And definitely this discussion should go on, especially when we have a totally different economic paradigm, which is put forward by the government, which of course is again not going to be based on biodiversity or the Antyodaya of which Gandhiji has actually conceived. And then we need to have remain as a corrective force wherever the biodiversity should, the benefit of biodiversity should go to the common man. And we will conclude with the national anthem.
We can chant.
Yeah, 1 minute. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. We enjoyed it.